Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Sophie. If you watch my channel regularly, you know I talk about books, and that means because we are in the last days of 2025 that I'm making my best reads of the year video. Bibliosophie. I have picked 10 books for you, and I'm not giving them to you in any sort of ranked order. This is merely the order in which I read them. So with that in mind, first up is The Undying by Anne Boyer. The subtitle for this book is very long, rather a mouthful, and I don't know if I love the subtitle, but it does describe the book rather well. Pain, vulnerability, mortality, medicine, art, time, dreams, data, exhaustion, cancer, and care. And that is indeed what the book is about. This is Boyer's memoir of her time with breast cancer. That's a weird way of saying it, but her experience being a breast cancer patient and survivor. But it's more than that. Boyer really seeks to problematize the illness storytelling, the illness memoir, and specifically the cancer memoir. It's not the raw cancer survivorship. I did it and everything's great. Instead, it's an indictment of the medical system in the United States in particular, and the trade of cancer, the commodified capitalist entity, which is cancer care. She draws on art and writings and data, scientific data, to talk about what cancer means as a cultural entity, the capitalist implications of the medical system, the environmental implications of chemotherapy, etc. And so it's a very interesting look at the reality of cancer. Next is There's Always Next Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is a basketball memoir, sort of. I am not a basketball fan. I am, however, a big fan of Hanif Abdurraqib. He has made my best of the year list previously, I'm pretty sure, and I really like his writing style and what he seeks to write about. So with that in mind, despite the fact that I'm not a particular basketball fan, I did want to read this memoir or series of essays, and I am very glad I did. This is sort of about basketball, about his relationship to basketball and watching basketball as a child in the 80s and 90s in Ohio, but it's also about excellence, about the expectations of excellence, what it means to make it and what it means not to make it. It's a love song to Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. It's about underdogs. It's about lineage and family and community and what it takes to survive the world in many ways. Next, we have Paradise by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is another person who has definitely made it onto plenty of lists of mine. She's one of my favorite authors, and I'm in the process of reading all of her novels. Earlier this year, I read Paradise, and it was a difficult read in a lot of ways, but also a really fruitful one. We start with a really brutal scene of the murder of several women who have been living in a convent on the outskirts of an all-Black town. And over the course of this thorny book, Morrison takes us through kind of what has happened to create that brutal, violent scene at the beginning of the book. And we are unwinding these convoluted, overlapping histories of the people from the town, from outside the town, to take us to these events. This is about race, of course, in America, about history and dealing with that history, about the cost of protection and safety and community. It's about absolutism and religiosity and hypocrisy. It's about violence and violent undercurrents and seeking out protection from that violence. On the Calculation of Volume by Solvej Balle. This is a multi-volume series The intended number is 7. I don't believe all 7 have been written. I think 6 of the 7 have been published. 3 of those have been published in an English translation, and I read those first 3 this year. I am, for the purposes of this list, just thinking of all 3 of them as one work. You have potentially heard about this. This is the time loop novel, and some people really do not get along with it. Some people think that it's wretchedly boring, and I can't even really fault them for that, or I can't really argue against that. Yeah, it's the same day over and over again. Our protagonist is a woman who finds herself waking up in November 18th repeatedly. So thousands of November 18ths elapse. But the way in which this time loop is different from a Groundhog Day, for instance, is that she doesn't completely reset. She doesn't reset geographically, so she can move around, and she does. Spoiler alert. But she also doesn't completely reset in terms of her body and some of the objects around her. So this is a very interesting exploration of time, of course, but also of place and space and the ways in which space turns into time, time into space, objects, the history of objects, the personal histories, the histories of physical connections to people versus just mental and emotional connections, what it means to be in a time and place when time stops making linear sense. Infect Your Friends and Loved One by Torrey Peters is a novella that Peters originally published a few years ago and recently republished in the collection Stag, which has a couple of novellas and short stories earlier this year. I didn't love Stag as a full volume, but I was really intrigued by Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones. This is a near future dystopia in which an act of bioterrorism has rendered all people unable to produce sex hormones naturally. So basically, the result is that everybody needs to be on some form of HRT. And that really drastically changes the world and makes everybody live a sort of trans life. It's a kind of horror story. There's some kind of grody violence and horror tropes in it. It's funny and weird. It's also fundamentally about human connections and disconnections. And it's an interesting trans novella that explores trans rights, but trans wrongs also, I would say. The Princess of 72nd Street by Elaine Kraf. This is a book from the late 70s, 1979, that has been considered a sort of underappreciated classic. And it was recently republished, which is how it came into my life. And I'm really glad that I got to know it. This follows a young woman named Ellen, who's an artist, and who also becomes, when she has these episodes that she calls radiances, Princess Esmeralda. She lives on the Upper West Side, 72nd Street in Manhattan, and has these interactions, weird interactions with all sorts of people around her. It's really about what it means to be a woman and how the world treats you, about mental illness and being kind of on the outskirts of things, about body autonomy, about attempts to be yourself. What is the cost of conformity versus the cost of individuality, personal bodily cost as well as social cost? It's a short book that really packs a punch and is both witty and funny and exuberant and also kind of gut-wrenching. Hotel World by Ali Smith. In this book, Smith takes the premise of Memento Mori, remember you must die, and turns it on its head. and writes a book about Remember You Must Live. This is a relatively unusual narrative. It follows 5 characters in 5 disparate storylines in 5 sections, but all 5 are connected around a hotel. Some are more closely connected than others. 2 of the characters are sisters, but some are only very, very marginally connected by time and place. In this weaving of lives, Smith contemplates really what it means to be alive, what it takes, what goes into forging a life. No less than that. It's about the luck of the draw that goes into forming a life, the past and the future. How do you make a past? How do you get over a past? How do you make a future once you have had a past? How do you make connections to other people? How do you grieve? How do you build a life and live it and contemplate it and inhabit the world? It's a lot. Family Lexicon by Natalia Ginzburg is an ironic and loving semi-autobiographical portrait of Ginzburg's family. This is also a chronicle and a portrait of Italy in the 20th century, from the 1920s to the 1950s, the political realities of Italy as it devolves into more and more overt fascism, the experience of being a Jew in Italy at that time. But it is really formed around the family unit and, as the title would suggest, the linguistic unit of different circles, the family unit and its particular sayings, its particular patois, the larger units of friends or the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, the ways in which people of one crowd, one inner circle relate to one another, the habits, the mores of people. And it is both funny and wry and also very affecting. The Figure in the Carpet by Henry James. This is, depending on how you want to look at it, either a short novella or a longer short story. And it's quite perfect for book lovers, readers who love to interpret and dig into a work, and very much for people who are attempting to figure out an author's intentions, because that's exactly what it's about. Our narrator of the story meets his favorite author, a man he completely respects, and that author mentions the fact that there is a key to understanding the overarching principle and project of all of his work. Our narrator becomes completely obsessed with figuring out that secret. So it's a mystery novella, about digging into the interpretation of a work and how much you can be driven insane by figuring out what an author really, really meant. And finally, Strega by Johanna Lykke Holm is another hotel novel, actually. So we've got that through line in the list. This is a modern Gothic novel with a lot of creepy, kind of uncomfortable vibes. In it, our protagonist is a young woman who goes to live in a remote village called Strega to work at the Olympic Hotel. This hotel is full of other young women, a group of young women who daily toil in the gardens, in the laundry to make the hotel run, but doesn't seem to have any guests. So all of this labor, all of this women's labor, it seems to be just for the sake of the labor. This is about the violent transition from girlhood to womanhood, about the relationship between young women, about the expectations put upon women and women's bodies, and the community of women versus the world. It's weird, it's atmospheric, and it's a great read, I would say, for autumn and winter. My furnace had something to say about that. And that is my list. I will admit to you that I get really, really in my head about making this yearly list. I get in my head about making the right choices of books, how many books. I really tried to have a shorter list than I usually do and kind of cut the fat, but there's so many others that I wish I could talk about. I get in my list about, or in my head about trying to describe these books in a short way. So if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I actually filmed this video previously and then got so frustrated that I stopped and cried. And yes, it's a lot of unnecessary pressure to put on myself. So be nice to me. You don't have to do that. However, I would love to know which of these books you've read, what you thought about them, and what books made it onto your top 10, top whatever of 2025, what books you want to read in 2026. Thank you so much for watching me this year. Thank you for watching this video, and I will catch you in the new year in the next video. Ciao. Thank you.